Welcome,
Yes.
for those people who can show up on time. Born in Sheboygan, Wisconsin, and relocated to Grand Rapids at the age of
4.
Michael spent his early years in Christian schools and continued his education at Calvin College and graduated from the University of Michigan with a major in English literature. Princeton Theological Seminary was where he received his Master's of Divinity in 1976. Most of his ministry has been spent with the Reformed Church, and that includes 6 churches over the course of, believe it or not, 41 years. 4 in New York City, then the Church of the Tarrytowns in the last 10 years at Warwick Reformed Church in Warwick, New York. After retiring in 2017, Michael and Deborah moved to Little Falls, yay, to be near Deb's job at Montclair State, where she is a costume designer and in charge of the design program for the theater. Had it not been for a lucky golf game with Phil Miller, we might have lost him to another church. I think we all owe Phil a big debt of gratitude. And it's with great pleasure I give you Michael Peter Otte.
Thank you, Lisa. And thank you to Pam, especially, and Deborah, who put the slideshow together, my wife, and a late addition or assist from Scott Randall, who got the PowerPoint here.
And Bill.
And Bill, yeah. And I would like just briefly to introduce my son, who's in the back there, David John Otte.
Welcome.
He's the father of our only grandchild, and we are very proud of him, but we have fallen in love, totally in love with his daughter.
That's the way it is.
In David Copperfield, which is Charles Dickens' most autobiographical novel, he begins with this memorable line: "It remains to be seen whether I shall be the hero of my own life." And that was sort of the question that this request to present my life story presented to me. How shall I present myself? As the hero of my own life? Perhaps another role, the villain. Well, I want to assure you that after carefully selecting all these stories, they're all meant to make me look good. But that's really not what the church is all about, is it? That we want to celebrate achievements or talk about, how great a person we are or something like that. Really, we're supposed to do this to share the way God has worked in our lives and encourage other people in their walk with God. And so you could say that this is not just my story, but it's also, for a large measure, God's story, or how he worked in my life. Here's the truth of it, as far as I can understand it at this point in my life. I grew up in a very insular world, Christian Reformed Church, a Dutch community in the southeast side of Grand Rapids. Christian schools, Sunday school, church twice on Sundays, catechism, Sabbath observance, couldn't do anything on Sabbath, the whole ball of wax. And that we were special was built into the air that we breathed and the food that we ate and the lessons that we learned in Sunday school and church. We were special. We were disciples of Christ. We were the chosen ones. And we were to do our best to be adequate, at least, or good representatives of our faith. Now, in 6th grade, a girl came from the Lutheran church. First time I had met someone called a Lutheran. And though she was a nice girl and nice looking, we all felt sorry for her. She was going to hell and didn't even know it. So that's maybe a little bit of exaggeration, but you give me some poetic license. The thing of it was that even before I was born, a crack had opened in the dike of this world that I lived in, anyway. No, I'm Dutch, so the dike analogy is the one I chose. Don't want you to miss it. A crack had opened and water was coming through, even though I didn't know it, and that is represented in my mind by my mother's mental illness. She was discovered, this illness was discovered really when she had her first child, and she didn't want to come home from the hospital. And after every child that she had, she would usually stay in the hospital at least 2 weeks. And then after the last child was born, who was 7 years my junior, she stayed in the hospital for either 6 weeks or 3 months, something like that. I don't remember exactly. But all 4 of the children, or maybe 5 at that point, were farmed out to friends and family. And it wasn't until my dad didn't like that anymore. After about 3 weeks, he got us back into the family circles, and my grandmother and grandparents were helping out at that point too. And the ladies from the church were bringing casseroles to sustain that family. So that's the chasm in the dike that was letting in the real world, if you will, a world of another reality of somewhat chaos and somewhat confusion, and not the little insular world where everything made sense that I had experienced. And this dike broke wide open when in high school, my senior year, I was cut, I thought, fairly from the basketball team. And the waters rushed in. No longer did I believe in this world at all. I took a couple big gulps of the salt water, and the forces, I did flounder in these forces for a while, maybe a couple of years, trying to keep my head above water. But eventually, these same forces drove me into the ministry. They drove me back to the God who had, in fact, never deserted me. And this is the story of how that happened. So, it's a story of how God gave me, first of all, life, and then, eventually, a new life in Christ. And I hope you'll find some connections in how God works in our lives in the story that I tell. I want to quote the Dutch immigrant minister who always filled in the church of my youth when we were without a pastor. And we all loved him because he had a thick Dutch accent. And he sometimes wept in the pulpit. Weeping Willie called him. But he began every sermon with this sentence. What then shall we say about the God with whom we all have to do? Not bad accent. So I'm going to tell you first a little about my grandpa and my grandmother, and my mom and my dad, and then we'll get to my growing up years in the story of how I got into the ministry. So this is my grandpa, Otte, Peter, and his 10 surviving children. This is my dad on the corner and his twin brother, Jake. And Peter, Otte, was a street sweeper in some little town in the Netherlands before he came to this country, and he eventually became a street sweeper in Sheboygan, Wisconsin. But the reason that he came to this country was that his girlfriend, Marion, was discovered to be with child, as we say in the Bible, and her family was appalled. He was obviously of a lower social station than she was, and they were opposed to this union, so they eloped, got on a boat, off to America, and the baby, Cornelius, was born on the boat, the whole boat. They eventually ended up in Sheboygan, Wisconsin, and we would go there every summer for the big Labor Day picnic. All these people had marriages and 5 to 8 children. Lots of cousins, big picnic. We would stay with Grandpa in his corner house by Lake Michigan, and I would get up and have breakfast with him every morning and was fascinated and eventually grossed out by what I saw. He had a cup of coffee in the morning, and he would take a raw egg and crack it on the edge and drop it into his coffee. So as a little boy, I would watch this, and sure enough, after the coffee got down to the bottom, there would be one final as he swallowed that egg yolk. Anyway, one time, one summer I was there, and this only happened once. He caught me in the living room by myself, and he gave me a $1 bill, and he said, "Don't tell your dad." Well, of course, first chance I got, I said, "Go up with Grandpa gave me." I was like, "That mean old man gave you $1? Amazing." The truth is that my dad was not overly fond of his father, who made 2 decisions about my dad's life, both of which affected him adversely. The first one is that none of the kids went to high school, by the way, until they got down to John and Jake. And Henry, the last one, went to high school. But between John and Jake, Grandpa said, "Well, they're both good students." My dad told me he got all A's. Whether that's true or not, no one can disprove or prove. But John is much the better worker, so John gets to go to high school, or Jake gets to go to high school, and John gets to go to work, give me his paycheck. What my grandpa didn't know, my dad said, is that Jake needed John for protection. So after getting beat up for 2 weeks in high school, he came back and never went back again. So my dad began his working life after 8th grade and worked most all of his life. The other decision that my grandpa made in relationship to my dad was that my dad was a really good baseball player. You'll see later his forearms like Popeye. He was very strong, he had great vision. And he hit the ball to all fields, and he never hit anything but line drives from what they say. When we had a picnic, they would say, "Back up, John's up." You know, they go back to the trees, he'd hit it over into the trees. So he's taking his American Legion team to the finals in Kansas City one year, and it's the 9th inning of the World Series for that amateur league or whatever, and the guy hits a pop-up in the foul territory by third base. He was a third baseman. And ball hits his glove and pops out. There's a man on base, so the next pitch he hits a home run and Dad's team loses. But there's a scout from the Cubs in the audience, and they had been watching him. And not so soon after he came back from Kansas City, the scout shows up in his dad's home and with a contract to sign, a minor league contract with the Cubs. His dad says, "Will he have to play on Sunday?" The guy says, "Of course." He said, "I'm not signing." My dad loses his chance to join the Cubs farm system. The Cubs lose probably one of the best bats they might have ever had, and that's why they didn't win the World Series before they did in just 2014. But so we'll leave Grandpa Otte, autocratic, patriarch of a big family, not used to being disagreed with. And move over to Grandma or Grandmother Overbeck, who was the female version of Grandpa Otte. Although I think she had a little more heart. Grandmother Overbeck was also a young woman when she came over to this country, and her brother had preceded her and had sent the passage, the fare, for her to come first class, because he'd come steerage, and you had to go through Ellis Island. And he noted that if you were first class, you could go right to Manhattan and avoid that, mess on Ellis Island. So he sent her the difference in the fare, but asked for a brooch that her mother had given her as keepsake for this loan. She eventually came over, worked, paid him back, and asked for the brooch back, and he said, "No, sorry." And she never forgave him. So she goes first to Indianapolis, Indiana, where she meets a young, handsome merchant marine cook by the name of Arthur Overbeck. And they too find themselves to be pregnant. They get married, but not so long before my mother's birth. My mother was a firstborn. So that they never celebrated their anniversary, because if someone did the math, they could realize that she had been conceived before they were actually married. Not that anybody cared really so much, but they cared. And it's indicative of what I think is really the culture of guilt and shame that pervaded that small insular Dutch world and which now, I'm not an expert, but I do think was probably some of the roots of my mother's mental illness. So we knew when we went to Grandmother Overbeck's, who also lived in Grand Rapids, that we had to be on our best behavior. She had us walking around with books on our heads to keep up and make sure we had, proper posture. She was always quizzing us on the timetables. If your elbow strayed to the table while you were eating dinner there, you immediately heard, Michael, Michael, strong and able, get your elbow off the table. And the whole family would chant it. They were all watching. Now, grandmother was a domineering personality, talk, but we really did love her, and she was quite a presence in our home. She'd come over for tea every once in a while. And the one story I remember was I was probably about 7, and there was a Sunday school pageant at our church, and my mother had me practicing by going up to the 2nd floor, and if she could hear me in the kitchen, then it was okay. So when it comes to church, of course, none of the other kids had this preparation, and I belt out my line, and everybody pays attention, takes notice, and on the way home in the car, and I'm standing up in the back seat, there's so many people in the car, 5 kids, and Grandma and Grandpa, she says to me, Michael, you really did a good job. I think you should be a minister when you grow up. Which, of course, was as far away as the possibility in my little mind as could be. So that's Grandmother Overbeck. Let's go back to my dad. My dad only had an 8th grade education, as I mentioned, but he was a lifelong reader and would take us to the library often on a Saturday morning so we could all get books. And he was also an elder in his church for 18 years and often vice president. A lay preacher, he preached downtown in Grand Rapids at the Salvation Army to the men who had to attend the service before they could get a meal. The service that I went to one time with him, I still remember the topic. I thirst. He said, I know you guys are thirsting for a drink. So he began. Not a bad speaker, a good storyteller, a lover of life, really. He loved a good beer, a double brat, that's bratwurst, and life. And he was always on the go. Growing up, he played baseball with me, and I was always aware that he had a major league arm, basically, and if I didn't catch the ball right in the pocket, he could sprain one of my fingers. He never really taught me to hit the way he could, but we played a lot of basketball together, too, which my friends called Sheboygan basketball, because he would just grab me until he got the ball from me. And they couldn't get around him, he just... but it was a kind of style of ball that I took on as my own, and I would play basketball, just throw myself at every ball. I was just constantly moving, totally into it. He never hit us. He didn't have to. We didn't want to disappoint him. How I knew he really loved me was that one time in the summer, my friend went out in the woods and we forgot to come home for dinner, and it turned out to be dark, and I was coming home, and there was a cop car in the driveway, and I was like, oh, my brothers are up to it again, but it was me they were looking for. So they're all glad to see me, of course, but my mother expects me to be punished, and he takes me down to the basement, and he says to me, I'm supposed to be spanking you, but I'm so glad to see you. I can't do it. So we stayed down there for a suitable period of time and came up. My dad was something of a character and great with his grandkids, and we have a lot of pictures of his grandkids. And when he came to visit, it was always special. We would show our pictures, kids of Grandma and Grandpa are coming. And one time we went to the Bronx Zoo, and we're looking at the lion cage, and one of the kids says to my dad, Grandpa, what would you do if the lion came out and came at you? Dave can attest to this, I hope. And he says, well, I'd kick his ass over the Empire State Building. So for the next couple of weeks, all we hear around the house is, I'd kick his ass over the Empire State Building. But As much as I love my dad, I never told him we were Dutch. We didn't say that in our family. I think I said it on his deathbed, but I'm not sure he heard me. But the main thing I really admired about him was that he stood by my mother through her mental illness. So my mom, as I said, this postpartum depression was a symptom of her illness. And over the years growing up, basically my wish was for a normal mother. That was what I wished for. Someone like Mrs. Lautenbach, who was my friend's mother. She was a nurse, very organized, always fussing over Henry. That household ran. I was in it for 3 weeks. It ran like a German watch. Very efficient. She came over when my mother was in the hospital, by the way, and organized all our drawers, which my older siblings were furious about. I thought she was fine. But now I am actually pretty grateful that I had the mother that I did. The gifts that she's given all of us children really are, and we didn't understand what was going on, and I'll tell you a little bit more about what the experience was like growing up with her, but she gave us the kind of understanding that, don't be too quick to judge someone else whose behavior you find to be outrageous or downright stupid or whatever, because you really don't know what demons they're fighting. Now, she didn't tell us this. We just kind of figured this out after a while. And the other thing that she gave us was she was always trying to get us to be better and more compassionate people. And just one quick example. When a neighborhood family moved in with about 8 kids, there was one in my grade, which probably was about 4th or 5th grade, and my mother said, now, Wendy Meekoff, she'll be new to your school this fall, and I want you to walk her to school. It's about a mile away. Introduce her to all the kids and, give her that kind of support. I was like, oh, Mom, 4th grader. But I was nice to Wendy. And I did introduce her at least to a few people. So the way some of my mother acted out her mental illness was once she cut off all her hair. Another time she stole a lawnmower, and she didn't even come home with it. She just stole it and went in the other direction, Wasn't that she wanted to get the lawnmower. The last time that I remember her really acting out was when I was in high school. She called the Salvation Army and told them to come and get all our furniture. And we came home, and there was a Salvation Army truck parked at the front door, and they were taking out furniture. But my sister-in-law, who was living at the house in the basement at the time, had come home just before me, and she told them, no. Put it all back. Oh. Thank you very much. So the unpredictable part was really that she could blow up at us. And it probably only happened to me once. But I witnessed it happening to my older siblings. Tom and Tim were the 2 older boys, and they were the traditional hell on wheels kids. I can't even begin to talk about all the pranks that my oldest brother pulled. He was a very smart kid, very fresh, big mouth, very fast. You couldn't catch him. I was a runner, but I had no chance against him. And one time, for example, my mom got a phone call from a woman down the block who said, Dorothy, I just saw your boys run by. One is naked and the other has a knife. How that happened is that Tom was always pulling pranks, and what he figured out is that the bathroom with a shower in it, had an old window that opened like this, and the back door was to the left underneath with a driveway, and he could fill up a pail or a pitcher or something, and when my other brother came out going to the backyard, he could dose it on it, And so this time, Tim looked up and said, I'm going to kill you. Tom believed him, ran out the front door naked. Tim went and got a knife in the kitchen and went after him. Unfortunately, as I said, no one could catch Tom. So, my mom would blow up at him. You're going to hell out here. And one time when I was about 8 or 10 and old enough and big enough now to stand up to her, I wouldn't do the garage. I wouldn't clean the garage on a Saturday morning, and my dad had to intervene. But that was really probably the last time. Now, what happened with my mother, though, really is that this final stay in Pine Rest for, as I say, 6 weeks, 3 months, or whatever, apparently did help quite a bit. And they either did shock treatment on her or threatened her with it. I'm not sure what. But the man, ironically, who was in charge, the director of Pine Rest, was a man named Stuart Bergsma, a psychiatrist who had been a former missionary in India, Ethiopia, the court doctor to Haile Selassie, and the grandfather of my, not then, but current wife, Deborah. So when we're engaged, he feels compelled to let her know the full story in this Otte kid. You know, he says your mental illness does run in families. As crazy as it might sound, she wasn't fazed. She married me anyway, and so far I've been able to keep at least a tenuous grip on reality. You'll hear a little bit more about Deborah later. But, so that's my mom. Yeah, I think we should move on, huh? Let's go to some other pictures. That's my mom and dad getting married. That's my dad holding me. That's me in my famous clown pajamas. I'm ready to get up from my nap, I think. I noticed the spiky in my hair. This was a perennial problem for me. I had a double crown, and the hair would twirl and stick up in the back. I looked like a rooster and got a lot of crowns.
You don't even notice
This is Mom and Dad and me going to Sheboygan one time on the boat. And this is Mom and Dad at 1531 Penocking. This is the family picture. I'm in the center. Tom is behind me. He became a Presbyterian ministry. Tim was a history teacher who became a chef. Barbara, a high school principal. No, an elementary school principal. And John, not in the picture, is a psychologist in Denver. Here I'm up to high school. So, I mentioned getting cut from the basketball team. Growing up, I was a good athlete. I played all the sports, including tennis and golf as I got older. I was always quarterback on a football team in school. I was a catcher in the baseball team, in Little League and first baseman, catcher in school on the team. I made the team when I was in 8th grade, and it was all 9th graders. My freshman, of course, captain of the basketball team, and my freshman year in high school was continued. I was captain of the basketball team, and our junior year, the team won the state beat class championship in Lansing, Michigan, against a team from Detroit. So I expected to play as a senior. There were 7 seniors, but there were 3 people who were coming out back for the guard position. My one friend, Steve Veniclassen, about 6'4", a very good guy, good athlete, and he went on to play 4 years of scholarship ball at Northern Michigan University, so you knew his position was set. The other position was between me and a guy named Jim Tellman, whose father had coincidentally given $500 for the championship film the year before. And my seasoned opinion is that I was cut so as not to give Tellman any competition for the position. Now, I went and saw the coach. He said I was looking for defense from that position. And my response is, he can't take me. So, nevertheless, my dad's response was to go in and talk to him and probably yell at him. The principal of the school saw my dad come in the room and he said, "John, I don't care what happens in that room. I just ask, don't hit him." And my mother's response, though, ever the philosopher, "Mike, one day you'll realize this is all for the best." You know, mother was right. It kind of made me who I am and drove me to the ministry, I would say. So anyway, life went on. I made the basketball team as a freshman. You know, I worked really hard that year. Played basketball that one summer, just about every night. I work at the meat packing factory, and then I play basketball. And the coach was actually the college coach was actually watching us at the rec center. So he kind of knew me a little bit, and anyway, I made the freshman team, and I didn't start. I played a lot of games, and I played more than Tony, who sat on the bench. That was the point. So after that first year, the coach says to me, you know, Otte, you work harder than everybody, you throw yourself after every ball. Any coach would be happy to have you on your team. Again, words that spoke directly to my soul, right? That's what I needed to hear. Why don't you try out? You don't have as much talent as some of these guys, but why don't you try out for the varsity? You know, keep working hard. And I heard that, keep working hard stuff. And I said, thanks, but no. Quit the basketball team. Also, you have all kinds of time. Started smoking cigarettes, hanging out in a coffee shop. Went out with 5 guys, joined 5 guys in off-campus housing, kind of a mini animal house. And the junior, that was my sophomore year, midway through the first semester, my best friend is suspended from classes at Calvin College because he skipped more than 5 times. The chapel is compulsory.
Chapel.
Skip chapel.
Skip chapel.
Skip chapel. So we said, well, this is outrageous. He's paying tuition. No, I can't go to class. So the 5 of us said, we're going to demonstrate. We made some posters. We got a bullhorn. We called the newspaper and the television station. We said, we're going to demonstrate against compulsory chapel. I don't think they can. But anyway, a demonstration of 500 kids coming out of class, and we got our posters. We only did it once, but we became quite quickly persona non grata on the college campus. And I think we came under the observance of the administration, but students would say to us, you know, didn't you know there was chapel here when you came here? If you don't want to go to chapel, why don't you leave? And we thought about that and said, good idea. So 3 of the 5 applied for and were accepted at the University of Michigan, which turned out to be probably the best educational decision that I ever made. Now, at that time, my best friend Todd and I considered ourselves to be agnostic existentialists. I think he was more on the atheist side. But we were reading all the existentialists, Sartre, Camus, a guy named Beryayev, and that's how we saw ourselves. And but then that first year in U of M, I'm reading Sartre one day, Being in Nothingness. And let me just summarize the book. Nothingness wins. Big thick book. Everything turns to crap, is what he says. And I'm reading that book one day, and he says, well, if you've told a lie once, you're a liar forever, because the moral law is determinative. It's like the physical laws in life. There are consequences. They are real in your life. And once you've told a lie, you are a liar. Now, I knew I had told at least one lie, in fact, more than one, and I didn't really sit well with me. Here's my guy, you know, you're a liar. I'm a liar forever. And of course, my Christian upbringing came into play, and I said, well, what about forgiveness or the possibility of character change? Opened me up intellectually, at least, to the Christian faith. The other thing that happened my junior year at U of M is I'm sitting in an English class, and the guy's talking about the Greek myths. And he says, you know, the Greeks have their myths, the gods come down on earth, they muck around with the human beings, and they go back up to heaven. And Christianity has its myth. Jesus comes down from heaven, he mucks around on earth for a while, and he goes back up to heaven. Just like the Greek myths, you have the Christian myth. And he says, a myth is a lie. Now, I don't believe in God at this point, right? But I'm thinking, you know, this guy's so full of it. So I raise my hand, and I say, yeah, but there seems to be one big difference between Jesus and the Greeks, and that is that Jesus was a real historical person, and he did live among real human beings. And the guy's like, yeah, but then, you know, they took this real person, and they made up all this stuff about him, he walks on water, blah, 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 blah. You know, you can't believe all that. Still, though, I said to myself on the way home, what am I defending Christianity for? You know, I'm not into this stuff. You know, I've left that behind. I'm a U of M guy. You know, we question everything. But that laid the groundwork for what later became the basis for my working out my own theology. Because at Princeton Seminary, what happens when you first get there is, especially if you've had a pretty sheltered background, they really hit you with form criticism of the Bible, and they want you to be aware that, there's a lot of issues in terms of people having some material in front of them and copying some of it, and then they make up their own stuff, and so forth and so on. And you never know, you have to kind of sift through the Bible to find out maybe the real truth of the matter, But it's a very skeptical view of the Scripture. And, of course, I grew up on the Scriptures. We had it every day in school, and I actually loved the Scriptures. And so they weren't giving me any help in terms of the Christian faith, I thought. But I thought through it this way, in terms of both my seminary education and my experience at U of M. Jesus was a real person. There's more things written about Jesus than almost any figure in history. And if you're going to contest the historicity of Jesus as a person, you're going to have a lot of proving to do, right? So he's a real person. And he gets himself killed by the Romans. And the people who know him best, who lived with him as their rabbi, teacher about God and healing and so forth and so on, they said after he died, we think God is like that. That's what God is like. The way he died, forgiving his enemies, that's just like Jesus. And that must be what God is like. So, what they did then, they started telling other people, this is good news, God forgives you. He doesn't get back at you for doing the wrong thing. He suffers with you in the consequences of the thing that you have brought on in yourself. Right? So, that has sustained me my entire life in ministry. It's an interpretation of an event. Jesus died on the cross. Right? God is like that. You can disagree with that interpretation, but you can't say, I'm stupid or crazy. Right? Okay, so let's move on. My senior year, now these two things have happened in my junior year in terms of opening me up intellectually to the faith. In my senior year, I'm already thinking, I got to do something about this. And I'm not telling my friend. How are we doing on time? Anyway, let's go ahead. See, that's my cross-country team. I was on the cross-country state championship team, too. Runners. And that's Mom and Dad. Oh. I think they're probably, that's in the 90s. So anyway, my senior year, I go to the chapel, which is ironically at the University of Michigan. At the time, the position of chaplain is held by a Christian Reformed Church minister. So in the very church I was fleeing, right? And I go see him, and I start talking to him, and I say, Christian, Reformed, and I either Christian or Reformed. And he says, that's a good one, I got to tell my friends. But a warm, generous, loving human being. And he touched my heart. And over the course of that year, he said, I think you have a sermon in you. I said, me? What? He's like, yeah, you got at least one sermon in you, boy. You want to use it? You want to use it, but write a sermon, you can preach here. I said, He says, all right, well, think about seminary. So I did think about seminary. I went back to Grand Rapids, got my job back as a meat packer, and wondered what I was going to do with my life. Now, I'm really remiss if I didn't talk about Deb a little. There's a wedding picture. So I met her at the University of Michigan when she came down for a weekend with her current boyfriend. He had told us about her. He was a friend of one of my roommates, and his name was Ishmael. He was kind of a roundish person with blonde curly hair, a very loving man, a very young, loving guy. Everybody loved him, but we also didn't take him very seriously. And he was a butt of a lot of jokes. So he comes down the week before, or a couple weeks before, and he says, I got this wonderful girlfriend. She's really smart, beautiful, creative, and fun. He's like, Ish, you gotta be kidding. How would you get a girl like that? He said, I don't know, but she likes me. So, get this now, she comes down with him, and in order to attend a frat party from her high school boyfriend at the University of Michigan. I was like, no, there's something wrong with this picture. Now, I was not going to be taking my girlfriend down to go to a frat party with a former boyfriend, right? We never told you this part, did we? So, anyway, we meet her, and my friend Todd and I, as far as beautiful and creative and fun, there's no denying that. But the smart part, we decided we would be the judge. So we said, have you read any Dostoevsky? No. Well, you have to read, to call yourself educated, you have to read the Grand Inquisitor chapter of the Brothers Karamazov. Take your time, read it, and tell us what you think sometime during this weekend. Well, she sits down and she speed reads it in about 8 minutes. And she says, a lot of interesting dialogue between the Grand Inquisitor and Jesus. I said, I have to look into this. Well, we were kind of, that's it, seriously, she took us, you know. So anyway, I graduate, I go back to Grand Rapids. She's 2 years behind me in school, so she's still at Calvin. And I play bridge one night on a Wednesday night. Now, I usually would stop at this Calvin bar on Friday nights because of where the Calvin kids hung out, but I stopped on a Wednesday night, and there she was at the bar. She invited me to a party with thespians that she was having at her house on Friday, and the rest, as you say, is history. Well, on her birthday, January 24, of 1972, I asked her if she would marry me, and we'd been going out for about 3 months maybe. Her mother knew me a little bit. She said, well, I'll have to ask my mother. Maybe someday we could get married. I said, well, I'm going to seminary in the fall. I was thinking this summer. She said, well, ask my mother. So, 24 hours later, I called her up and said, what did your mother say? She said, well, she said you seem like a nice, clean-cut young man. It's like, good, so you're going to marry me? Yep. Okay. So, we got a little bit of time left. I said I'd tell a story about
10
each
minutes.
church. 10 minutes? Yeah. I also said I'd tell you how to be happy. And what else was there in there?
5
But anyway,
pounds.
what?
5 pounds.
Oh, how to lose 5 pounds. You might have to stay after for that. So this is West End Collegiate on 77th and West End. Deb was in her first year at NYU, my last year of seminary, in an MFA in costume design, and so we looked in the city, but we both loved the city. And this is my mentor and first pastor, Ken Gorsuch. That's the interior of the sanctuary. It's a beautiful sanctuary. And the first summer, as always, Ken would take August off, and that left me in charge. And preaching all of that first August 1976. And a couple comes to the door and asks to see me, and I let them in, and they say, we'd like to get married on Friday or Saturday. Would you do that? And I said, well, you know, I'm very new in the ministry, and I think I have to register before I can do that, but how come you're in such a hurry to get married? You know, usually there's more time involved. And they said, well, last year we were vacationing in England, and we stayed at a hotel, and we registered as Mr. and Mrs., and we won the lottery that they had. Oh, they had a little lottery. So they introduced us as Mr. and Mrs., and we're going back to the same hotel, and in case they have a lottery, we want to be ready. So I put my mind around this. Well, you're saying you want to get married just in case you win the lottery. You might not win, you know. And they said, well, you know, we're ready to get married. So in September, they said, well, I'll have to think about it, and I think I probably have to have, this is the collegiate churches, there are 4 congregations, and Vincent Peale Norman Vincent Peale, you know, is at Marvel, and he always gets the young assistants to sit at his table. And he opens the conversation by saying, anybody have any interesting stories that have occurred to you already in the city, in your ministry, since he was the first time meeting many of us. And I tell him this story, and he said, oh, that's a good New York story. And Dan Poling, the senior minister of Fort Washington, says, I think I married them. And Poole says, oh, well, let's move on here. So this is at West End. Deb is pregnant with Elizabeth, and we're singing Papagano, Papagana from Mozart's The Magic Flute. That's my one career appearance on Broadway singing opera. Every year they would have the assistant minister at West End go up to Sullivan County and get trees for everybody in the church. We didn't sell them to other people. We got a couple for the church, and then we sold them to the people who had ordered them from the church. And I rented a U-Haul, and I got back the biggest tree that they'd ever seen. This is also a West End identification. Oh, I wanted to show that. See, I was once a real person, smoked cigarettes, drank beer. The beer part continues. That's my first congregation. I'm the only pastor. Primarily a black congregation with a lot of West Indians. Flatbush, Brooklyn, Bedford Avenue, Lincoln Road, Grace Reformed Church. So everything is new. And the first summer, the fridge goes out. So I take the meat out of the freezer and cross the street and go up the block to a deacon, and I say, could you take my meat and, save it, and the fridge is broken, what do I do? He said, well, call the treasurer or the vice president, and Roy Constant, call Roy, he'll tell you what to do. He's the treasurer. So I call Roy, Roy says, go to Sears, take a, tax exempt form, when you get a price, I'll write a check, go back, get the fridge, it'll be delivered whenever they can deliver it. It was delivered that Saturday. It was a hot summer day. We're out of fridge all week. I take my little cart, I go down to the beer warehouse, and I get a case of Miller High Life. That was my beer of the choice at the time. I come back to the house, and I stack all 24 bottles in the fridge. At 11 a.m., the doorbell rings, and it's Roy. He says, you get the fridge? I said, yeah, I got the fridge. Can I see it? No, okay. So I bring him in and go in the kitchen, and we're standing there looking at the fridge. I said, isn't that a fine fridge? So finally he looks at me and says, can I open it? I said, all right. And he looks at the beer, and I say, I do have my priorities. Now, Roy had a great sense of humor. That whole church had a great sense of humor. I've never heard the beer story come back to me, but I'm sure that he must have shared it with some of his friends. This is John and Dorothy, my parents, with Elizabeth at the Brooklyn Botanical Gardens, where she now works. This is Deb and I on vacation. That's you, Dave. We each take turns with the baby. This is my dad doing what he did best, drink beer and cook bratwurst. That's his grandson, Michael. This is Old First with Deb and the kids in front of the house there. That's Colonial Church in Bayside. That's Deb at her costume shop. I just want to mention this church because we went there after Grace from 86 to 88, and the previous pastor had started a Taiwanese Bible study, and I would preach at that, or I would lead that Bible study, and kept growing and growing. They got a lay preacher, and they eventually asked for permission to use the basement of the church. These are really nice people. The church said no. Then I asked again, they said no. Then they asked again, I said no, and then I left. So, that happens in the ministries. Churches are churches. And you have to roll with the punches, but you also have to believe, now in my life, let me just say this, I believe more than ever in the gospel and the work of God in the world, but less and less in the church as an institution, which are, maybe this is an exaggeration, but usually all looking out to survive as a church first. Okay, Deb in her costume shop, CW Post. Terrytown is in between this. I guess we have time for a quick story with Terrytown. Some of you know that I'm a bridge player, and I got into bridge seriously a little bit after college, but then took a big hiatus and didn't get back into it until I was in Brooklyn, in the city. I played a few times in a Brooklyn club, but it was a very contentious club. One time I had to separate two 80-year-olds who were fighting each other. So I decided to go into Manhattan. So I'm at the Jacoby Bridge Club, which is open every day and every evening of every day of the year at the time. Huge bridge club. They say, well, you're a novice, go sit over there. Maybe someone will come and you can play with. So a professional comes in, although I don't know it, and he says, I'll play with anyone. His name is Jake Barrett. And we play and have a good time together, although I'm a novice. He knows it. But afterwards, he says to me, well, what do you do for a living anyway? I said, well, I'm a teacher. He says, what do you teach? I said, oh, I teach this and that. And I said, better yet, I'm a kind of a guru. He's like, come on, what do you really do? Now, the reason I was hesitant to tell him is because at the Brooklyn Club, where the director knew I was a minister, I let it slip. In bridge, you're supposed to be ethical, and if your partner takes a long time to make a decision about something and then passes, you have unauthorized information that he has some points or she has some points, and you're not supposed to act on that. So if that happens, they can call the director, who will look at your hand to see if you had your bid, right? So this happens to me. The director is called, He comes over. He says, there was a pause, he bid again. And the director immediately says, well, he's a minister, he wouldn't lie about this. He says to me, do you have your bid? I said, yeah, I have my bid. He said, well, he's a minister, he wouldn't lie. And she says, I don't care if he's a GD rabbi. I think I was greedy. I said, no more ministers. So finally I said, well, I'm a minister. He's like, how about that? My dad is an Episcopal priest. So we became friends. I played with him for a year, and he introduced me to really the bridge world. And after playing with him a year, I had 25 points, which is master points, and then 15 of them were gold, which you only get at the regional level. So he taught me a lot, and I still enjoy the sport a great deal. So anyway, what happened in Terrytown is my confirmation class decides to have a car wash because I make them do some service project. And we're doing it on a Saturday from 1 to 5 p.m. And about 5 p.m., when some of the kids have already left, it was me and the class kid left. And a guy drives up in a beat old car, like 10 years old, and it hasn't been washed in about 10 years. So we start washing this car, and the kid's spraying it, and I'm washing. We do about 3 or 4. It takes about 15, 20 minutes before I get it even. You can see the finish, And the guy gives me $20. And the kid says, is that all? But anyway, that's what happens. That's what Christians do, whatever happens. So then eventually I go to the Scarsdale Bridge Club, and I meet a guy, but I don't recognize him. It's the same guy that's bought the car. Anyway, we develop a partnership, and we go to the Nationals twice with a team. So, do what you're supposed to do, and you never know how to work it out.
5 minutes, Michael.
Okay. One more story at Warwick Reformed Church. We had a great 10 years at Warwick. It's a wonderful community to live in. I was very active in the community, the Rotary, and I was president of the Ecumenical Council for 10 years. And we started a Hispanic ministry to the black dirt workers who mostly had to work, but there was enough Hispanic community so that the guy that came into my office and said, God told me to come and start a church here. And I said, funny he didn't say anything to me. But anyway, he did a great job. They had about 80 people in worship now, as I understand it. And one of the stories coming out of that ministry is 2 of the guys worked at a car wash for 10 years, but were never paid any overtime. They met a lawyer who said, it doesn't matter if you're not legal, and they weren't. There are labor laws, and we can get your money back. So they took the guy to court. They quit the job, got other jobs. They took the guy to court, and they won, right? Now, this small community, and the police have their cars washed at the same car wash for nothing. So the guy says to the police, these guys are illegal, and they're causing trouble in my car wash. And I want you to give them a little hassle that you know about them and stuff. So both guys get visits from the police at 6 o'clock in the morning, ring the doorbell, whole family's, awakened. They threaten them, they say, we understand you're causing trouble down at the car wash or whatever, and just watch your P's and Q's. So these guys come to us really scared. We say, this shouldn't be. So I go to the mayor, I don't even know who's in charge of the cops. And he says, no, you got to go to Michael Sweeten. Well, he's my good buddy from Rotary. He's a supervisor of the town of Warwick. We take the guys to Michael Sweeten. Michael Sweeten sees one of the guys, he's like, Louis, hugs him. He performed marriage for the ceremony, wedding for the guy. We tell him the story. He says, here's my cell. He says, you're not going to hear about this again. And he takes care of it, talks to the police chief, and the police, stop any harassment. But the guy starts. He parks his truck in front of their house, follows the kids to school. When the kids get out of school, he's there to watch them as well, follows them on the way. We go back to the police. Says Michael Sweeten. Says the police chief. What you got to do is come in here and file a complaint against this man for harassment, and we'll take care of it. So they do. And he's visited by the police. That took care of the problem. But in a small town, the reverberations went through the community because he was a member of Rotary too. But I told enough pastors in the church that, the car wash business, I think, fell off. Okay. How about this business, though, about being the hero of your life, of your own life? And really, as I reflect, and I'm glad for the opportunity to reflect on my life that this has given me, I was really caught in mostly forces beyond my control and had to cope with them as best I could, given the age that I was. A very emotionally fraught childhood, I would say, in which I tried to escape through sports and reading. So that developed something in me, but nevertheless it was my response to something way beyond my control that I didn't even understand at the time. Then getting cut from the basketball team. All of a sudden I'm introduced into a larger world where things don't always go your way, And if you can't cope with that, you're going to have to grow up and become disillusioned, which I think is always a good thing. You get your illusions taken away from you. This is what the world is like. And don't think I didn't play enough basketball. I went and played city basketball. I played in murals at U of M. I played at seminary. I played in Brooklyn in the Y until I was 42 and I broke my Achilles. I got my basketball out. So, then marriage. What a gift. Who would have thought? This woman. 47 years. She won the award for the most years in her high school. Still an amazing woman. 2 great kids. And all the time, though, in my life, I'm still searching, I'm going from church to church. Why couldn't I stay at one church? Well, because I would try to do the job and go on to it. I wanted another challenge. I wanted fulfillment. I wanted success. I wanted, love, if you will, or acceptance or something. I'm still searching for it. But then I wanted God, you could say. God is both the carrot and the inspirer for my life, actually. And then finally I come to Union, which is a result of Phil Miller telling me on the golf course, great music, great preaching, why don't you try it out? So here I am, among you. And we get a birthday celebration on December 1 of our first grandchild, who, there's Dave and Liz is in Brooklyn. There's me preaching in Warwick. There's Deb now. Dave's wedding. They captured all our hearts.